The rain poured hard over Abuja that night, hammering the wide streets of the capital like a drum of war. At a lonely checkpoint near Oppo Bridge, 4 policemen stood, their uniforms soaked and rifles clutched tightly. The night had been quiet, just taxis rushing home and buses full of tired workers. Then out of the storm came a black Prado SUV, its tinted windows dark as a coffin. The car slowed only after the officers shouted twice, its powerful headlights cutting through the curtain of rain. The policemen exchanged quick glances. Abuja was a city of big men, and flashy cars often carried trouble. Sergeant Bello, the oldest of the 4, stepped forward and barked, "Driver, wind down." Slowly, the window slid down, and the torchlight fell on a familiar face. It was Pastor Joseph Ade, the preacher whose posters decorated Abuja walls, the man whose voice filled stadiums, the man politicians invited to pray at their campaigns. His clerical collar was crooked, his Italian suit damp, but his calm face carried no fear. One officer froze, unsure whether to salute or question. But he kept his voice hard, "Pastor or not, open your boot." Joseph hesitated, then stepped out into the rain. The policemen followed, water dripping from their caps, hearts thumping like drums. With one soft click, the boot lifted. The beam of the flashlight entered, and what it revealed froze the blood in their veins. Inside lay 2 human heads wrapped in nylon bag, still dripping fresh blood that mixed with the rainwater gathering at the base. The heads stared back at them with lifeless eyes, mouths half open as if screaming their last words. One officer gasped and stumbled back, another dropped his rifle in shock. "Jesus Christ!" one shouted. "Allahu Akbar!" cried another, voice breaking. The rain roared harder, but their ears were filled only with the pounding of their own terror. Through it all, Pastor Joseph stood still in the storm, his face calm like stone. He did not beg, did not explain, did not move. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate. For years he had been hailed as a prophet of God, the man who healed the blind and raised the lame. Tonight, in the heart of Abuja, he stood revealed as something else entirely. And as the rain washed over him, the city's darkest secret had just been dragged into the open. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but Abuja had not slept. News spread faster than the morning sun. From the Hawkers Inn was market to the officials in government quarters, everyone whispered the same words. They caught Pastor Joseph with human heads. Radios buzzed, social media burned, newspapers rushed to print extra sheets. People gathered in clusters, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some shouted curses, some wept openly, some refused to believe at all. "It is a lie. Enemies are framing him," cried one woman. But another spat on the ground, "So this is the blood behind his miracles." The once loved name now carried the taste of ash on people's tongues. Outside his massive church in Jabi, the billboard still glowed with his smiling face and the words "Fire for Fire Crusade." But now angry youths gathered beneath it, hurling stones, shouting, "Remove this devil." Inside small shops and offices, people argued fiercely. Some remembered the nights they had lined up to receive healing water from his hands. Others recalled the lavish donations he demanded, promising breakthroughs that never came. A few even claimed they had suspected all along, pointing to the way he avoided questions about his family. The city throbbed with a sense of betrayal, like a wound freshly opened. Meanwhile, in the police station, Joseph sat in silence as officers paced around him. Reporters banged at the gates, demanding to see him. The commissioner of police held an emergency briefing, his face stern as he confirmed, evidence was found. The suspect is in custody. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, but the truth was already louder than any official statement. Abuja had watched Joseph rise from a small preacher in Nyanya to a household name. Now they were watching him fall, and the speed of his disgrace was breathtaking. Men who once sought his prayers now denied ever knowing him. Politicians who had sponsored his crusade scrambled to cut ties before their own reputations burned in the fire. Yet through all the noise, the man at the center of the storm said nothing. He sat on a wooden bench, drenched suit clinging to his body. The silence from his lips screamed louder than the chants outside. To some, it was proof of guilt. To others, it was proof of demonic possession. And as Abuja reeled in shock, no one could guess the depth of the story about to unfold. Long before the flashing cameras and police sirens, the story of Joseph began inside the Ade family home in Gwarinpa. Their mother, Mama Ade, was a proud woman who raised 4 sons after her husband's early death. She poured her soul into the church, fasting, praying, and hoping her children would serve God. Her prayers seemed answered. CY, the eldest, built a megachurch in Port Harcourt. Christian followed with a thriving ministry in Lagos. David rose in Ibadan, commanding crowds with fiery preaching. Each brother carried the title of Man of God, each drawing thousands, their names celebrated across Nigeria. But Joseph, the youngest, struggled in Abuja, where his church barely filled a classroom hall, and his sermons left people yawning. From childhood, Joseph was different. He had a silver tongue, smooth and eloquent, but his words carried no power. When CY prayed, people fell under the anointing. When Christian laid hands, the sick leapt in healing. When David shouted fire, testimonies filled the air. But when Joseph tried, nothing happened. Members left quietly, seeking miracles elsewhere. His brothers encouraged him, but their success was a constant reminder of his failure. Your time will come, they told him, but behind their gentle words, Joseph felt pity and quiet judgment. At family gatherings, Mama Ade would beam proudly at her 3 sons, while Joseph forced a smile, his envy eating him alive. In Abuja, the competition was fierce. Dozens of pastors fought for the city's attention, each promising bigger miracles than the last. Joseph plastered posters, rented halls, and shouted scriptures with all his strength, but still the chairs sat empty. He watched as his brothers were invited to preach abroad, while his phone never rang. He listened to their testimonies of healings, while he struggled to even pay rent for his small church office. Each failure dug deeper into his pride. At night, he lay awake, asking God why he was left behind, why heaven's doors were locked against him while his brothers flourished. Bitterness took root like a poisonous seed. Joseph began to see his brothers not as family, but as rivals. Each newspaper article about their success burned him. Each miracle story from their pulpits mocked his empty hands. Abuja, the city of wealth and power, had no room for a powerless pastor. And so Joseph carried a growing hunger, not for salvation, but for recognition, for applause, for the day crowds would shout his name. That hunger would soon open a door no prayer could ever close. The night of Joseph's big crusade was supposed to be his turning point. For weeks, posters had covered Abuja's walls, healing explosion. Pastor Joseph Ade, the God of fire will visit you. He rented an open field near Burger Junction, hired loudspeakers, and paid choirs to sing until their voices cracked. As the sun set, a crowd gathered, some curious, some hopeful, many simply passing by. Joseph climbed the stage in his white suit, sweat glistening under the lights, his Bible raised high. He shouted promises of healing, declaring that God would prove himself tonight. For a moment, the crowd clapped, energy rising, and Joseph felt his dream within reach. Then they brought the madman. He had wandered the streets of Wuz for years, filthy, dreadlocked, his eyes burning with madness. People gasped as he was pushed to the front. "If you are truly a man of God, free him," someone shouted. Joseph stepped down, his chest tightening, but he forced himself to smile. "In the name of Jesus," he cried, laying his hands on the man's head. The madman blinked, then burst into wild laughter. Joseph shouted louder, shaking his head, commanding demons to leave. But instead of falling, the madman shoved him so hard he stumbled back. The crowd murmured. Joseph tried again, voice breaking, but the man roared like a beast and struck him across the face. Gasps filled the night as Joseph tumbled, his suit tearing in the dirt. The choir stopped singing. Ushers rushed forward, but the crowd was already jeering. Some laughed openly, pointing fingers. Others whispered that Joseph was fake, a powerless pretender. Humiliation burned hotter than the floodlights. Joseph scrambled to his feet, dust and blood mixing on his lips, his Bible lying forgotten on the ground. He tried to shout another prayer, but the madman lunged again, this time tearing the collar from his neck. The policemen watching from the roadside shook their heads, while vendors mocked, selling roasted corn with jokes about pastor without fire. By the time the crowd dispersed, Joseph stood alone on the stage, clothes ripped, spirit shattered. The field that was meant to mark his rise had instead buried his last ounce of dignity. As he stared at the empty chairs and flickering bulbs, one thought consumed him: prayer had failed. The God his brothers called upon had abandoned him. And if heaven had turned its back, perhaps another power could open its arms. That night, envy turned into desperation, and desperation began to whisper dangerous names into his heart. The days after the crusade were the darkest of Joseph's life. News of his humiliation spread across Abuja faster than the harmattan wind. Market women laughed about how a madman beat a pastor. Bus drivers used his name as a joke whenever their engines failed. Try Pastor Joseph to pray for it, maybe the motor will beat him too. Even church members stopped attending. Chairs in his small hall stood empty, offerings dried up, and the landlord began demanding rent. Joseph's phone rang endlessly, but it was not invitations to preach. It was reporters mocking him, anonymous callers taunting him, and his brothers warning him to stay patient. But patience had run out. Every night, Joseph locked himself inside, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment the madman tore his collar. His heart boiled with shame. He swallowed his pride and visited CY in Port Harcourt. Sitting in his brother's gold-furnished office, he begged, "Help me, teach me your secret. Why does God answer you and not me?" CY smiled sadly and said, "Your time will come. Keep praying." Joseph tried Christian in Lagos, but Christian repeated the same words. David in Ibadan offered nothing different. Each rejection felt like a nail in his coffin. They had power, he had nothing. They had respect, he had mockery. On the long drive back to Abuja, Joseph clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He whispered to himself, "If God will not answer me, then I will find the one who will." It was in that state of bitterness that he met Baba Ife. The man was known in the shadows of Abuja as a prophet with strange powers. Some whispered he was a healer, others said he was a sorcerer who mixed scripture with blood. His shrine was hidden behind an abandoned warehouse near Kiryai, a place of flickering candles, goat skulls, and drums that never stopped beating. Joseph went there at midnight, his heart trembling but his pride unbroken. Baba Ife welcomed him with a crooked smile, eyes glinting like hot coal. "Pastor Joseph," he said softly, "I know why you are here. You want power that works." Joseph nodded, unable to speak. Baba Ife leaned close, his breath heavy with palm wine. "Power does not come free. Power feeds on blood. If you want your church to rise, you must give something that costs you dearly. Not goats, not cows, human blood. The blood of those close to you." Joseph's heart pounded. He thought of his brothers, of their shining ministries, of his own disgrace. The words sounded like poison, but also like honey. Baba Ife placed a black candle in his hand. "Decide, Pastor. God has ignored you. But he tapped his chest, I can make Abuja bow at your feet." The storm that had begun in Joseph's soul now roared louder. Joseph wrestled with the choice for nights that felt like years. He prayed, he fasted, he cried, but heaven stayed silent. In the silence, Baba Ife's words echoed like thunder, "Power feeds on blood." The pressure of disgrace pressed on him until his chest felt caged. Then one evening, he made his first move. He invited his cousin Tony, a young man who adored him, for dinner. Tony laughed, joked, and spoke of dreams for the future, never seeing the storm in Joseph's eyes. After the meal, Joseph suggested they pray together. He led Tony into the small church hall. Candles flickered around them. His hands shook as he laid them on his cousin's head, not in blessing, but in betrayal. Baba Ife stood in the shadows, chanting words no church had ever taught. Moments later, Tony's lifeless body lay across the floor, and his screams swallowed by the night. The days after Tony's death brought results that shook Joseph to the core. During Sunday service, a woman blind for years suddenly cried out, "I can see." Another cripple stood and walked, shouting praises. The congregation erupted, clapping, screaming, throwing money at the altar. Joseph's heart raced. For the first time in his life, he felt power move through his hands. Crowds doubled the next week. People carried their sick relatives in wheelbarrows, begging for miracles. Abuja began to whisper again, but this time with awe, not laughter. Joseph's name returned to lips, but it was no longer a joke. The man of God has finally received fire. But Baba Ife's demands did not end. Months later, he returned to Joseph with a chilling smile. "The altar is hungry again," he said. Joseph resisted, but the fear of losing his newfound glory gripped him harder than guilt. That year, his uncle became the second sacrifice. He arranged it as a family prayer meeting, convincing his uncle to kneel before him. The chants rose again, the air grew heavy, and another body fell cold. Joseph's soul screamed in horror, but his church roared with testimonies. The lame danced, the barren conceived, and television crews began filming his crusades. Each drop of blood spilled turned into a flood of worshippers pouring into his church. Abuja had found a new prophet, but beneath the miracles lay a foundation of graves. Joseph stood before cheering crowds, his hands lifted high, his voice booming with fake confidence. Yet in the corner of every service, he saw Tony's face. In every testimony, he heard his uncle's last breath. The applause was thunder, but his soul heard only silence. The trade was clear, his church rose, but his humanity fell. At home, Joseph's wife Stella celebrated his sudden rise with innocent pride. She told neighbors that her husband was now a vessel of God's fire, that their prayers had been answered after years of struggle. She welcomed church members with smiles, hosted ministers who came to pay respect, and wore new clothes from the offerings that poured in. But she did not know the cost. At night, when she lay beside Joseph, she felt his body shiver, but she thought it was exhaustion from ministry. When he whispered in his sleep, she assumed he was praying. Never once did she imagine that blood was the source of their blessing. She bragged to her friends that their two daughters, Sophia and Martha, had received scholarships abroad. In truth, Joseph had begun weaving a web of lies to cover his dark path. Baba Ife had warned him clearly, the altar will always demand blood. Each year, it must be someone closer. Someone who tears your heart. The first time, Joseph hesitated, but as the crowd in his church grew, as television crews broadcast his name, as envelopes of money filled his office, the fear of losing it all drowned the voice of guilt. He staged a grand farewell for his daughters. Photos were taken of them holding suitcases, smiling brightly, neighbors waving goodbye. In reality, only one made it out of the compound alive. The eldest was taken to Baba Ife's hidden shrine, where chants rose into the air and candles bled wax like tears. Her life was cut short, and her blood became fuel for Joseph's miracles. To Stella, everything looked perfect. She received letters, fabricated by Joseph, claiming the girls were thriving in London. Church members congratulated her, praising God for favor upon their household. She smiled, proud to be called Mummy Gio. Yet behind every service, Joseph stood with eyes hollow. Each time he held the microphone, he saw his daughter's face flash across the crowd. But he drowned it with louder shouts, fiercer prayers, more promises of healing. The people saw only miracles. They did not see a father burying his soul one sacrifice at a time. Stella's faith in her husband blinded her from the truth. She paraded her jewelry, sang louder in the choir, and carried herself as a queen in the church. But in the dead of night, when When Joseph locked himself in his study, staring at the Bible he could no longer read, the weight of his deception pressed like chains. He lied to his wife, to his congregation, to his city. And the deeper the lies grew, the harder it became to imagine any escape. His throne of glory was built on blood, and each brick demanded more. Abuja had never seen a church grow so fast. Within 2 years, Joseph transformed from a struggling preacher mocked at street corners to a man whose posters covered every wall. Billboards showed his smiling face beside bold words, "Fire of Deliverance Crusade," "Blind See," "Lame Walk," "Dead Rise." Politicians invited him to pray before rallies. Businessmen knelt at his feet for blessings. Crowds flooded the church every Sunday, filling the air with shouts of Daddy and Papa. To the people, he was untouchable. To Stella, he was God's chosen. But to himself, he was a man drowning in a sea of sacrifices. With each passing year, the rituals demanded by Baba Ife became heavier. Every new bloodshed unlocked new wonders in his ministry. Television stations fought to cover his crusades. Some said Abuja had never seen a preacher gather such a multitude. Others whispered in secret, "This man is dangerous." But no one dared confront him openly. His fame was a fortress, his influence too wide. Stella thrived in the spotlight. Dressed in flowing gowns, she led women's conferences, preaching loyalty and prayer. She looked at her husband with glowing eyes, never suspecting the shadows that stalked him at night. When she knelt in prayer, she asked God to bless her husband with more strength. When Joseph stood at the pulpit, raising his hands, the crowd roared. They did not see the guilt that gnawed at him. They did not see how his hands trembled when he was alone. They only saw miracles. The more blood he spilled, the louder their applause. But beneath the glory, Joseph was becoming a prisoner. He could no longer sit in silence without hearing the screams of those he had offered. He could no longer close his eyes without seeing faces from the past staring back at him. Yet the more he tried to stop, the more Baba Ife reminded him, the altar must eat. Without blood, everything dies. Joseph was trapped in a cycle. He was celebrated by millions, honored by leaders, and worshipped by his followers. But inside, he was a broken man chained to a throne built on bones. The pattern was clear now. Every year, when the same season returned, Baba Ife would appear at Joseph's door. Sometimes it was through a dream, sometimes in the flesh, his eyes glowing like burning coal. He never wasted words. "The altar is hungry," he would say, and Joseph understood. That demand became the rhythm of his life, a shadow following him no matter how brightly his church shined. The first sacrifices had been hard, but as years rolled on, his heart grew colder. When the time came, he already knew someone close to him would fall. And with every death, the miracles became louder, the crowds larger, the fame unstoppable. Yet the fear inside him grew as well. He wondered each time, who will it be this year? In the third year, he gave up his childhood friend, Emma, the one who had once stood by him during days of mockery. Emma's only crime was loyalty, but loyalty made him too close to Joseph, and closeness meant danger. The shrine drank his blood, and Joseph's name spread even more. The fourth year, suspicion stirred. One elder in his church began whispering that something was strange about the pastor's sudden power. Joseph silenced him in the most final way, another offering to the altar. By the time the fifth year arrived, the demands cut deeper. Baba Ife's voice was firm. "Blood of strangers no longer satisfies. Bring your own." The sixth year was darker. Martha, his second daughter, had grown into a graceful young woman, dreaming of returning to Nigeria as a lawyer. Instead, her father betrayed her in the dead of night. He staged another farewell, packed a suitcase with clothes, waved at some church members who came to see her off as the car left. But the journey ended at Baba Ife's shrine, where the chanting swallowed her future. To the congregation, she became a success story overseas. To Joseph, she was another ghost haunting his sleepless nights. Each time he looked at Stella's smile, guilt stabbed him, but fear was stronger. Without sacrifice, the altar would strip him bare. And so the cycle continued. The city of Abuja shouted his name, his church became a fortress of glass and marble, and cameras followed him wherever he went. But behind the bright lights, his soul was chained to a dark covenant. Each year reminded him that his empire was not built by prayer but by blood. Every shout of "Daddy" from the crowd echoed in his mind as a cry from the ones he had buried. The ritual was his crown, but it was also his curse. And no matter how hard he tried, he could not break free. Just like they said, every day for the thief but one day for the owner of the house. On that faithful night, thunder rolled across Abuja's dark skies as Joseph's black SUV sped through the slick streets, wipers slashing furiously against the downpour. He had just left Baba Ife's hidden shrine, the smell of blood still clinging to his clothes. Wrapped tightly in the nylon bag in his car trunk was the head of his latest victim, meant for the altar before dawn. His chest pounded, not from guilt, but from the fear that if the sacrifice was delayed, the altar would turn against him. His phone buzzed with messages from his church leaders about a crusade scheduled for the weekend, but he ignored them. He had only one task tonight: deliver the head. The city lights blurred as the car cut through the storm. Up ahead, flashing torches appeared, police officers manning a late-night checkpoint near Woods. Normally, Joseph would glide through easily. His tinted SUV and reputation as Daddy Gio often made officers salute without question. But tonight was different. The rain had slowed traffic, tempers were high, and the officers were determined to prove they were not sleeping on duty. One officer raised his hand. "Stop there. Park well." The SUV rolled to a halt, engine humming low. Rain dripped off the officers' uniforms as they approached. "Good evening, sir. Open the boot." Joseph forced a smile, hoping money would speak faster than words. He slipped a bundle of naira into the officer's wet hand. The officer looked down, then back up, suspicious. "Sir, step down and open your boot," another officer commanded, shining his flashlight inside the car. The beam stopped at the nylon bag in his trunk. "What is that?" the officer asked sharply. Joseph's throat tightened. "Church materials," he replied too quickly. The officer leaned closer, the sour metallic smell cutting through the rain. His eyes narrowed. "Oga, carry that thing out." Joseph hesitated, then tried to laugh. But before he could speak, the officer yanked the bag open. A flash of pale skin, dark hair, and the unmistakable face of a severed human head rolled into view. For a second, silence swallowed the rain itself. Then came the shouts. "Blood of Jesus! Human head! This man is carrying a human head." The officers drew their rifles instantly. Joseph froze, his hands trembling, his mouth open but no words forming. People from nearby cars rushed closer despite the storm, straining to see. Phones came out, cameras clicked, voices screamed. The once revered man of God sat powerless, caught in the glare of headlights and judgment. One officer dragged him to his knees. The interrogation room at the Abuja police headquarters was dim, the ceiling fan spinning lazily as if mocking the tension. Joseph sat on a metal chair, his once spotless white cassock now soaked, stained from dragging at the checkpoint. His face, usually proud and commanding from the pulpit, was swollen with fear. Across from him, a stern officer banged the table. "Man of God, explain yourself. Whose head was in that bag?" Joseph's lips trembled, but no sound came. Another officer slammed down a Bible in front of him. "You preached the same word every Sunday. Yet we found human flesh in your car. Talk." The silence stretched, the air thick with accusation. Joseph's fingers dug into his knees, his breath shallow. Finally, he whispered, I only wanted to be like my brothers." The officers exchanged glances. One leaned closer. "Which brothers? Talk straight." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. He spoke like a man breaking apart piece by piece. CY, Christian, David, all of them. They had power. Their ministries shook the ground. But me? I was nothing. My prayers were empty. My words, powerless. The people mocked me, spat on me. Even my own family doubted. His voice cracked, but he pushed on, trembling. I begged them to help me. They said, "Your time has not come." I couldn't wait anymore. That was when I met Baba Ife. At the mention of Baba Ife, the room shifted. The officers leaned forward, sensing something deeper. "Who is Baba Ife?" one demanded. Joseph's shoulders slumped. "A prophet, but not of God. For 6 years, I fed the altar. Cousins, friends, elders, even my daughters. Every miracle you saw in my church was bought with their blood." His words dripped with horror, echoing off the walls. The officers sat frozen. One rubbed his face in disbelief. Another spat on the floor. "Pastor, you are worse than an armed robber. You used the name of God to drink blood." Outside the room, voices of journalists echoed, demanding details. Joseph covered his face with his hands, sobbing. "I only wanted to be great. I only wanted them to respect me." His confession poured out like a flood, destroying the last mask he wore. The preacher who once commanded crowds now sat broken, stripped of pride, his voice shaking like a child's. His empire had fallen, not with fire, but with words dripping regret. The news broke like wildfire. By morning, every television station, every radio, every newspaper in Abuja carried the headline, "Pastor caught with human head, confesses to ritual sacrifice." The city buzzed with shock, anger, and betrayal. Videos from the checkpoint went viral, showing Joseph kneeling in the rain, his cassock drenched as police shouted at him. To some, it was justice. To others, it was humiliation they could never erase. "So this is the man who laid hands on my child," a mother screamed in anger. "This is the man who told us God healed us?" Lies. All lies. The betrayal cut deep, not just in Abuja, but across Nigeria. At home, Stella collapsed when the truth reached her. She had been preparing for a women's fellowship meeting when a neighbor rushed in with her phone, tears in her eyes. The video played, and there was her husband, dragged out of the SUV, a nylon bag torn open, the head revealed. Stella's scream shook the walls. She clawed at her own gown, crying, "No, not Joseph. This cannot be true." But deep inside, flashes of unease she had ignored for years returned like a knife. The mysterious farewells of her daughters, the empty phone calls with strange voices claiming to be them, the nights Joseph locked himself away, all the pieces fell into place. She felt as if her own heart had been sacrificed on that altar. Her body went limp, and women had to hold her upright as she wept. Mama Ade, Joseph's mother, could not bear the shame. In her village, people gathered at her doorstep, whispering, spitting, shaking their heads. She sat on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Joseph, my son, what have you done? You once preached Christ to me, now they say you carry heads? You have destroyed us. Her voice cracked, her grey hair damp with tears. The Ade name, once respected for producing powerful preachers, was now a curse. His brothers, CY, Christian and David, remained silent, refusing interviews, avoiding crowds. They walked with bowed heads, their silence fueling suspicion. Some said they knew all along. Others said Joseph had brought a generational stain none of them could wash away. The community boiled with anger. Some church members burned his posters, tearing down billboards that once carried his smiling face. Neighbors avoided Stella like a plague, whispering that she must have known. In markets, women swore never to trust another preacher again. Abuja had seen scandals, but none had cut this deep. A man who once carried the Bible now carried the stench of blood. His empire of light had turned into ashes of shame, leaving a family broken, a city betrayed, and a name cursed. Prison swallowed Joseph like a grave. The moment the iron doors clanged shut behind him, the noise of the outside world disappeared. No cameras, no worshippers, no flashing lights, only darkness, sweat, and the stench of despair. His cell was small, damp, and filled with the groans of other inmates. The man who once stood on marble altars now sat on a bare concrete floor. His white cassock had been replaced with a rough prison uniform, torn at the edges. Guards who once saluted him during crusades now shoved him like trash, spitting insults. Man of God, ABI ritualist? Sit down there, they mocked. Each insult stung, but none pierced deeper than the silence of heaven. For the first time in years, Joseph tried to pray, but the words caught in his throat. The God he betrayed no longer answered. At night, he lay awake, haunted by the faces of those he had sacrificed. His daughters appeared in his dreams, smiling the way they once did, before their laughter was swallowed in blood. His cousin, his uncle, his friend, all of them came back in whispers, their voices accusing him. You sold us for power. You killed us for fame. Joseph would wake in a cold sweat, clutching his chest, gasping for air. He could see his Bible lying untouched on the floor. He had asked the warden for one, hoping to find comfort, but every time he opened it, the words blurred. The same book that once gave him sermons now condemned him, reminding him of the blood on his hands. Outside the prison walls, the world moved on. His church fell apart, members scattering like sheep without a shepherd. Some leaders tried to defend him, but the evidence was too heavy. Politicians who once sought his blessings now cursed his name in public. The marble building that once hosted crusades was locked, weeds growing in the compound. Abuja, once proud to host his gatherings, now spat out his memory. His wife Stella stopped visiting after the second month, broken beyond repair. Mama Aid's health declined, her heart crushed under the shame. His brothers still refused to speak. Joseph had become a ghost in chains, forgotten even by those who once screamed his name. Every day in prison felt like a lifetime. He sat with other criminals, thieves, murderers, rapists, but he knew he was different. They committed crimes for greed or anger. He had done it in the name of God, twisting holy ground into a slaughterhouse. That thought gnawed at him more than the cold food or the stinking cell. Alone, voiceless, stripped of everything, Joseph finally faced the truth. He was not a man of God, not even a man anymore. He was a hollow shell, his empire of miracles reduced to dust. And in the silence of prison, with no crowd to deceive, he discovered the weight of regret is heavier than any chain. Years crawled by in the prison yard. The first weeks had been filled with reporters, visitors, and endless noise. But soon, all the cameras vanished, and silence became his only companion. Joseph aged quickly, his once broad shoulders slumping, his hair graying faster than his years. The prison guards no longer mocked him, they simply ignored him like old furniture. Among the inmates, he was a puzzle. Some feared him, whispering that his prayers might still call down fire. Others hated him, spitting whenever he walked past. But Joseph no longer reacted. He moved through the corridors like a shadow, dragging his feet, carrying a body heavy with regret. His eyes that once lit up crusades now stared at the ground, lifeless. Inside his cell, he began keeping count of time with scratches on the wall. Each line marked another day of emptiness. His Bible still lay near his mat, but dust covered it. Mama Ade never recovered from the shame. She spent her last days sitting quietly, refusing food, her lips muttering prayers for a son who had lost his way. When she died, Joseph was not allowed to attend her burial. The news was delivered by a cold prison guard, and Joseph sat for hours without moving, tears running silently down his face. The Ade family, once known for ministers, was now remembered for disgrace. In prison, Joseph began to realize that silence was worse than chains. The applause, the lights, the shouts of Daddy had all vanished, leaving him with nothing but himself. For the first time, he understood the full price of envy. He had wanted to stand above his brothers, to command respect, to be seen as powerful. Instead, he was forgotten, rotting behind bars, remembered only as a killer in cassock. The man who once tried to command heaven now sat voiceless, his life reduced to dust and shadows. And though he tried to pray, no words came. Heaven itself seemed to have locked its gates against him. One hot afternoon, the prison warden called Joseph into the yard. The sun beat down on the cracked concrete, and dozens of inmates gathered, murmuring as they watched. In the center stood a new inmate, tall and rough, covered with tattoos. He had heard the story of the pastor who killed with Bible in hand, and saw it as a chance to make his mark. He pointed at Joseph, shouting, "So you are the great man of God, eh? Let us see your power here." The crowd roared with laughter, some banging on the bars, others whistling. Joseph stood silent, his body frail, his spirit weaker than ever. But the inmate pushed closer, jabbing him in the chest. "Pray for me, Pastor. Make my chains break. Or has your God abandoned you?" The humiliation dragged him back to memories of his failed crusade years ago, when a madman had beaten him before a crowd. This was the same shame, multiplied. Joseph's lips trembled. "Please, I am not who you think I am," he whispered. But the inmate slapped him hard across the face. The slap echoed through the prison yard, and inmates cheered. Guards looked on, smirking, unwilling to interfere. Joseph staggered, clutching his cheek, his eyes watering. Once he had commanded thousands, now even criminals mocked him without fear. The tattoos on the inmate's arms seemed to glow in the sun as he shoved Joseph to the ground, laughing. "See your daddy, Gio," the man jeered. "Your miracles are finished." On the floor, Joseph felt his soul tearing apart. He remembered the promises he once made to God, the children's songs in his church, his wife's proud smile, his mother's prayers. All of it gone. He wanted to shout, to call on heaven, but when he opened his mouth, only silence came. His voice had abandoned him, just as his miracles had. The inmates howled with laughter, pointing at the broken man on the ground. The news of Joseph's arrest had not yet reached Baba Ife, who had retreated to his hidden shrine in the outskirts of Abuja, confident that his hold on Joseph would continue even from afar. But in the weeks following the arrest, the flow of blood that had powered the altar ceased completely. Candles that once burned steady now sputtered and went out. The drums of incantation fell silent. Baba Ife's face twisted in anger and disbelief. "He cannot be taken from me," he snarled, pacing in the shadows. He had fed on Joseph's obedience, drawn power from every sacrifice. Without Joseph, the chain was broken. The shrine's atmosphere turned heavy, almost suffocating, as if the spirits he had commanded were rebelling. Meanwhile, Joseph, in the confines of his prison cell, began to feel something shift. For the first time since his arrest, the crushing fear that had gnawed at him for years was replaced with clarity. The whispers of the dead no longer haunted him as relentlessly. He realized that Baba Ife's power depended entirely on him, that every life he had sacrificed had strengthened the false prophet. The weight of guilt remained, but alongside it came a spark of defiance. Joseph closed his eyes and muttered prayers, not to call down miracles, but to ask forgiveness and to sever the chain that had bound him to evil. Each word felt like a nail driven into the foundation of Baba Ife's influence. Back at the shrine, chaos erupted. Candles toppled and objects flew across the room as if thrown by invisible hands. Baba Ife shouted, casting spells he had used hundreds of times before, but the power was gone. The spirits he had commanded turned against him, their moans echoing in anger. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as the altar rejected him. In one horrifying instant, the instruments of power, skulls, charms, and black candles, erupted into flames, consuming everything. Joseph, even from behind prison bars, felt the reverberation of the breaking chain. His chest heaved with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Though the horror of his past remained, he understood that the cycle of blood had ended, not because he had been stopped by men, but because he had refused to let Baba Ife control him any longer. For the first time, Joseph looked toward the possibility of redemption, though it was a long, treacherous road. He could not undo the past, could not resurrect the lives he had taken, but he could refuse to feed the altar again. And in that refusal, he discovered a fragment of freedom that no prison could take away. The news of Baba Ife's downfall had reached him through a fellow inmate, whispered like a miracle. The false prophet was gone, his shrine destroyed, his power extinguished. Joseph felt an unfamiliar weight lift from his chest. As the day wore on, Joseph's thoughts returned to Stella, to his mother, to the daughters he had sacrificed. Their faces haunted him relentlessly. He imagined their eyes, bright and trusting, now gone forever. He imagined Stella's grief, her pride crushed to dust. He wondered if she would ever speak to him again, if Mama Aid's death was a mark of divine judgment, if his brothers would ever forgive, or even acknowledge, the man he had become. Yet amidst the despair, he resolved that he could not allow their sacrifices to be forgotten. He would bear the weight of his sins publicly, tell the world the truth about the darkness behind the miracles, and perhaps in some small way, give meaning to the lives he had destroyed. The prison gates opened one afternoon, and Joseph was led to a room filled with journalists and officials. Cameras clicked, microphones rose, and questions were shouted. He stood there, trembling, hands shackled but heart steady. The man who once commanded crowds now commanded attention for confession and accountability. He spoke slowly, deliberately, recounting every detail of his 6 years of ritual sacrifice, the lies he had told Stella, the lives he had taken to feed his own pride. Tears fell freely, and his voice cracked, but he continued, unflinching. "I have no right to call myself a man of God," he said. "I have only a right to ask forgiveness, from God for my family, and from the people I betrayed." In the aftermath, the world reacted with shock, horror, and a rare sense of awe. Joseph returned to prison, but no longer entirely as a prisoner. He carried with him a burden heavier than iron chains, the weight of truth. The altar's hunger had ended, Baba Ife was destroyed, and the cycle of bloodshed in Abuja's shadows had finally been broken. Though redemption would take a lifetime, Joseph had taken the first step by facing the full consequences of his choices. Behind bars, he read the Bible with a new perspective, not to command miracles, but to understand mercy, repentance, and the cost of envy. Outside, his church crumbled and his followers scattered. If you enjoyed watching this story, please like, share, drop your comment, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.